What's up everyone, I'm Chirag and welcome to part 14 of the tutorial series on AWS HTTP API. So guys, in this video I will take you through on how to configure and integrate JWT Authorizer within HTTP API using AWS Cognito User Pool Service. So basically JWT stands for JSON Web Tokens and we will be using JWT Authorizer to secure our API endpoints. So guys, here we will be using AWS Cognito as the identity provider, but you can also use any other identity provider that issues access tokens and follow OAuth 2.0 standards. So now let's get started. So guys, as you can see on my screen, I have put this diagram together which basically demonstrate that how JWT Authorizer fits in the picture, and I will quickly walk you through this diagram. So as a part of the step 1, what happens is that the HTTP request is being made by the user to the API along with the appropriate method and the resource that he or she want to invoke, right? Which will also include a JWT formatted access token as a part of the header, which would be provided by the token issuer. So here in my case, the token issuer is the Amazon Cognito, correct? Now as a next step, the API gateway will receive the request, and after that it will pass the access token to the JWT Authorizer for validation. So as a step 2, the token would be with the JWT Authorizer. Now JWT Authorizer will decode the token and it will further execute the step 3, that is it will send the request to the issuer JWKS URI to fetch the public key. And here JWKS stands for JSON Web Key Set. So it will request the authorization server for the public key. Now as a part of the step 4, the authorization server will send the public key to the JWT Authorizer, right? And once JWT Authorizer receives the public key, it will validate the tokens algorithm and its signature using the public key received by the authorization server. And guys, at this point of time, only RSA based algorithms are supported. Okay, so I just want you to take note of that. And once the step 4 is completed, now let's assume that the validation of the access token is successful by the JWT Authorizer. So after that, the JWT Authorizer will confirm the API gateway to proceed because the token is valid, right? And once it confirms, the API gateway will invoke the backend integration, that is the Lambda function in my case, and that Lambda function will return the appropriate response back to the API gateway, and API gateway will return the response to the calling application. Right, so that's how the overall flow works, and that's how the JWT Authorizer fits in the picture. So guys, I hope that you got the overall idea that how JWT Authorizer works and how it fits in the overall picture. So now it's time to start the implementation part. So I will navigate to API gateway and click on routes from the left panel. So here I want to set up or configure authorization for the get method under /test resource. So I'm going to select that and we will say attach authorization, and here we will say create and attach an authorizer. Within authorizer type, we are going to select JWT, and then we will have a look at the authorizer settings, that what all things we will require to set up this authorizer. So name, then identity source, then we will require issuer URL. So that is something that we will get from the AWS Cognito service while we configure the user pools. And then we have the audience. So audience is nothing but the client ID, and client ID is something we will get from the user pool, correct? So before we go ahead and configure the authorizer over here, we need to configure the user pool within Amazon Cognito service, because this configuration is dependent on the user pool configuration, correct? So before we go ahead and navigate to the Cognito service, let's have a look at the steps that we need to follow to set up the user pool. So the very first thing is that we need to create the user pool, which would be followed by the creation of the app client without client secret, because here we will not need client secret, which is followed by the creation of the domain name, correct, which we will be using to fetch the authorization code or the access token, which would be followed by the creation of the resource server or the configuration of the resource server. So if you want to use the custom scope, then you can configure resource servers. It's not mandatory, I think. And then we need to configure the app client settings, followed by the creation of the temporary user, correct? So let's get started. So navigate to AWS Cognito, click on services, search for Cognito and click on that. And once you are here, click on manage user pools. and click on create a user pool from the top right corner. Give the pool name. I will say API Authorization, and we will say review defaults and say create pool. Now once the user pool is created, the next step is to create the app client. So click on app clients under general settings, and here click on add an app client. Give the client name. I will say auth client. Okay, and then we are going to uncheck generate client secret because we don't need the client secret, and I will leave rest of the option as it is. You can modify as per your requirement. And finally we will say create app client. So here we have successfully created the app client. Now as a next step, we need to create or configure the domain name. So click on domain name under app integration. So here we will be using Amazon Cognito domain, but if you want to use your own domain, then you can configure over here. So I'm going to enter the domain name. I will say API auth test 1, and I will see if it is available. This domain is available, and we can say save changes. Now once the domain name is configured, we are going to create the custom scope via resource servers. So click on resource servers under app integration. Click on add a resource server, give it a name. I will say res server. Provide the identifier. I will say test, and then we can define the custom scope over here. So I will simply say test.read, and within description I will say read. You can add any other scope that you want, like write scope, correct? And we will say save changes once the custom scope are configured or defined. Now as a next step, we need to configure app client settings. So click on app client settings under app integration. Now here you will be able to see the ID that we have created as a part of the step 2, which is the client ID. Now under enabled identity providers, we are going to check Cognito user pool, and then we will provide the callback URL. So I will simply say https://google.com, but you can provide your own domain over here. And then we have the OAuth 2.0 configuration, where we have allowed OAuth flows, allowed OAuth scopes, and allowed custom scopes. So we will start with the allowed OAuth flows. Now within allowed OAuth flows, we have 3 types, that is authorization code grant, implicit grant, and client credentials. So guys, if you want to learn more about these flow, then I have covered this in part 3 video of the API gateway authorization tutorial series, as you can see on my screen. I will post the link in the video description, correct? So guys, in this video, I'm going to use authorization code grant as well as the implicit grant. So let's start with the authorization code grant, and later I will show you the implicit grant. Okay. And then once you check this, this allowed OAuth scopes are enabled. So here we are not going to use the allowed OAuth scopes like default scopes. We will be using the custom scope. So I will check this. So guys, don't worry, we are going to come back here and we will play around with the scopes and we will see how it works. Okay. And we will say save changes. Now as a next step, we are going to create the temporary user. So click on user and groups under general settings, say create user. I will provide the username and I will uncheck this. I will provide the temporary password, test@123 for example. I will uncheck this and say create user. Now here we have successfully configured or created the user. Now as a next step, we are going to configure the JWT Authorizer within API Gateway, because now we have the issuer URL as well as the client ID. So navigate to API Gateway, give the authorizer name. I will say JWT Auth. Then we have identity source, so I'm going to leave it as it is. So what does it mean? That how you are going to pass the access token. So we are saying that we will pass the access token as a part of the header with the key authorization and the value as the access token. Okay. If you want to modify this, you can modify this. You can even say authorization token, but I will leave it as it is. And then we need to define the issuer URL. So the issuer URL is https Cognito IDP followed by the region. So you can change the region if you are in different region, but mine is US East 1, which would be followed by the slash user pool ID. So from where we will get the user pool ID? So click on general settings. So here you will be able to see the user pool ID. Copy that and paste it over here. So this is our issuer URL. and then we need to add the audience. So click on add audience, navigate to user pool, click on app clients, copy app client ID and paste it over here. Now once this configuration is done, click on create and attach. So here we have successfully configured the JWT Authorizer. Then here you will be able to see the authorization scope. So I'm going to add the custom scope over here. That is, I will say add scope. I will navigate to user pool. I will say app client settings and I will copy this custom scope, correct? And I will paste it over here and we will say save. Okay. Now what we are going to do is we will deploy this API endpoint to custom stage or the manual stage, that is version 1, and we will say deploy to stage. So now we have successfully configured the JWT Authorizer, we have deployed it. Now what's next? So the next step is to generate the access token, right? So here we are going to say launch hosted UI and then we are going to log in with the same user that we have created. So I will enter the password, or you can also create the user by clicking on sign up. Okay. So here I will say test@123 sign in and it will ask me to change the password. So I will set the new password, email, and I will say, so I think password is mismatched. Okay, now it looks good and then we will say send. Now as soon as you click on send, you will be able to see the code over here in the URL. So this is basically the authorization code. Now using this code, we need to generate the access token, right? So to generate the access token, we are going to open Postman, okay? And then we are going to copy the domain URL that we have configured over here, that is domain name. And I'm going to copy this. I will paste it over here. I will simply reformat this. Now it looks good. Followed by /OAuth 2/token. So to generate the access token or to fetch the access token, we need to use this URL, right, with the post method. So I will select post over here and then click on body. Here we will select xwww form URL encoded. And here we are going to pass few parameters, that is the grant type, grant underscore type, which would be authorization underscore code, correct? Then we have another parameter, that is client ID, client underscore ID. So we are going to copy and paste the client ID from here. Followed by the third parameter, which is redirect URI. So redirect URI we will copy from app client settings, that is google.com, followed by the authorization code that we have generated after logging in to the hosted UI. Okay, so that would be code followed by this authorization code that we are going to paste it over here, and then we will say send. Now as you can see, we have the access token as well as the refresh token, and the token type is bearer, correct? Now we are going to use this access token to invoke our API endpoint successfully. So let's open a new tab and navigate to API gateway, click on stages. I'm going to use the default stage. So I will copy the invocation URL. I will paste it over here, followed by /test route that I want to invoke with the get method. So right now we will invoke this API endpoint without any configuration or without access token. So we will say send. Now as you can see, it returns status code 401, that is unauthorized. Now as a part of the header, we are going to pass authorization. Why authorization? Because if we look at the identity source, then we have configured authorization over here. Now if we have configured authorization token over here, then we need to pass authorization token over here. Okay, but right now it's authorization, and in the value we are going to copy and paste the access token that we have generated, correct? So I'm going to copy this and paste it over here as a value. and I will say send. Now as you can see, it returns status code 200 and the invocation is successful using this access token, right? So if I don't pass the authorization header with the correct access token, then it's going to return 401 unauthorized. Or if I try to pass any other modified access token like ABC or something, and if I say send, then it will say 401 unauthorized. Okay. So this is how you can generate the access token while you are using authorization code grant. Now let's check one more thing. So what I'm going to do is I will navigate to user pools and I'm going to uncheck this custom scope, and instead I will say open ID, that is default scope, and I will say save changes. Okay. Now I'm going to generate the authorization code by clicking on launch hosted UI, and then I'm going to log in, that is sign in as srcecde, and here I will get the new authorization code. Now let me copy this and paste it over here and generate the new access token. Okay, so I will say send, and then I'm going to copy this access token and I'm going to use this access token to invoke the API endpoint. So let's see what happens. So I will say send. Now as you can see, it says 403 forbidden. Why? Because the access token or the authorization code that we have generated is for the OpenID OAuth scope and not for the custom scope, that is test.read, right? And why that access token didn't work? Because within API gateway, if you look at the authorization scope, then we have configured it as test/test.read. So that's the reason this access token will not work. Now let me show you one more thing. Let's navigate to this post tab. Now if I try to reuse the authorization code and if I say send, then it will not allow, right? So you can use the authorization code only once to generate the access token, correct? So that's basically authorization code grant, and that is how you can secure your API endpoints using the JWT Authorizer via authorization code grant. Now let's have a look at the implicit grant. So I'm going to uncheck this. I will check implicit grant. I will uncheck OpenID and I will check test.read and say save changes. Now I am going to say launch hosted UI. I'm going to sign in as the user. Now here, as you can see in the URL, we have the access token instead of the authorization code. Now we can directly use this access token to invoke our API endpoint. So I will navigate to Postman and paste it over here and I will say send, correct? So while you are using implicit grant, then you will directly get the access token. But while you are using authorization code grant, then you will get the authorization code and then you need to use that authorization code to generate the access token, right? So within authorization code grant, you add one more layer of security, right? So basically you generate the authorization code, and if that authorization code is valid, then only you can generate the access token and use that access token to access your API endpoint, correct? Whereas in implicit grant, you directly get the access token, correct? So guys, apart from that, I also want to show you that how you can access the JWT parameters or the JWT claims within the Lambda function, right? So what we are going to do is we will click on routes, we will click on get, and we will say configure integration, and we are going to open this Lambda function. Okay. And I hope we have the print statement for the event. So here we have. So I will click on monitor and I will open view logs in CloudWatch. Now what happens is that after validating the JWT token, so basically after JWT Authorizer validate the JWT token, API gateway passes the claims in the token to the API routes integration. So in my case, the API route integration is the Lambda function, right? And then within backend resources such as Lambda function, you can access the JWT claims. So let me quickly show you that. So let me open this log, and if we look at this event data, so here within request context, you would be able to see the authorizer, right? And within authorizer, you will get all the information regarding the authorization, right? That is JWT claims, client ID, event ID, scopes, username, and whatnot, right? So basically, if you want to access the claims within your backend integration, then this is how you can do that. So guys, that is how you can secure your API endpoints using authorization code grant or the implicit grants. So here what I have demoed is that we have configured the JWT Authorizer, we have configured the Amazon Cognito to generate the access token, and using that access token we have invoked the API endpoint. Also we have looked at the custom scopes and the OAuth scopes, right? So that how it works and how we can generate the access token particular to the given custom scope, and how we can configure the authorization scopes within the API gateway itself, and how we can secure the API endpoints. So guys, I hope this video is fruitful to you, and guys, that's all for this tutorial. Until that time, if you want me to do tutorial on any use case or service, then please leave them below and I will try my best to come up with the tutorial as soon as possible. And if you have any queries or comments, then again please leave them below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, and see you next time.